Well, like I said, I think the first book was just a small story that I was going to do, and I think probably near the end of working on that book, new ideas for new characters started to come up that I wanted to tell, and connecting them to that first book and putting them in the same setting just seemed like a good way. I really enjoyed doing the first book, so it's almost like you don't want it to end when you're doing a story like that, and so it was just a way to expand it and sort of stay in that world and continue it. So I think somewhere around the end of working on that first book, I sort of decided to do at least 2 books, and then the third one sort of became necessary after to tie everything together a bit tighter. So it sort of, I guess, grew out of that first book, and probably right near the end of working on it, the idea of the trilogy sort of. It's really interesting because I'm so used to being able to tell a story from beginning to end, and with any kind of monthly comic book, it really depends on sales, how long they'll let the series continue. So I don't know how long it'll last. For all I know, I know from my contract that I'll do at least a year of 12 issues before they decide anything, but it's a really different experience for me to try to plan out a story that's satisfying to me without knowing where the end's going to be. And so basically I know the beginning, and I know what I want the end to be. I just hope that they give me enough notice before they cancel the book that I at least get to tell that last story. And it's just, I mean, what's in between the beginning and the end will be either 12 issues, or if I'm lucky, 60 issues, and I'll be doing this for 5 years or something. Yeah, I really had to. The way they do monthly comics like that these days, for people who don't read comics, is they now collect almost every comic book series after 5 or 6 issues into like a graphic novel format to sell it again in bookstores and things. So they really want the story structured in 5 or 6 issue little mini stories within the bigger story. And I had to pretty much plot out, I think I had to plot out like 40 issues for them of what I would do, just loosely. And yeah, so I had to do all that stuff with my initial pitch to them. I think it's going to be the same dimensions as the original books, but where is it? Like I said, it's got like 60 extra pages. I think there's 2 mini comics I did set in Essex County as well, which I just sort of sold at conventions as I was traveling. And I'm going to include those into the book, and I think there's about 30 or 40 pages of stuff from my sketchbooks and some of my early character designs and things for the characters, which will all be in it. So I think it's like 512 pages, a hardcover book. So it's great. It's going to be great to see it all together like that. No, not really. I think if anything, my art's gotten more detailed and a little more realistic since I started doing the monthly book, which actually takes longer, but I'm still fairly fast in terms of what they're used to. So I haven't had a lot of problems meeting a deadline or anything yet. But my artwork's really changed quite a bit even from the Essex County and the Nobody on this new series. It's just natural. I mean, you're always just learning new things and getting better, but I think my stuff looks quite different now than it did, even 2 years ago. People always ask me why my books are so sad. I have no idea, because I'm not really a sad person. Adam was asking me earlier what the sort of the tones of my books being so sort of lonely and sad, and I don't know. I've always been a guy who enjoyed sad music more than pop music. I just, for whatever reason, that stuff just makes me feel more, and it seems to me that's just a much easier way to reveal the best in people is to put them through really hard times, and so my stories tend to put the character through a lot of hell. But they usually, I think the best aspects of those people end up coming through, hopefully, at some point in the stories as a result. And I think that's the reason why the new book tends to be, it's pretty violent compared to some of my earlier stuff, and there's a lot more action and things like that. But I'm trying not to just do it for the sake of doing it. To me, the action and the violence that I'm using, it's just another way for me to sort of up the emotional stakes of these characters and sort of hopefully reveal what's good about people and what's good about their friendship with the 2 main characters and things like that. And to me, my drawing style tends to be pretty stark and pretty. It's my line's pretty jagged, and sort of that lonely Essex County landscape seemed to really match with that. And, yeah, to me, it's such a landscape that it's just a perfect landscape to set those sort of lonely emotional stories. So, yeah, again, it's not really a conscious thing. That just seems to be the stories I'm drawn to, and I like to tell. Maybe someday I'll do a comedy, but I don't see it happening. So. The kinds of comics I don't like are comics that you can, with so many graphic novels being turned into films now, when you go to comic conventions and stuff, you see all these upstart small publishers who, they're clearly just publishing stuff as a way of trying to get a movie made. And the result is comics that are really usually pretty bad, like some high concept thing, like vampires meets, aliens meets, it's something really stupid that they think they can sell as a movie, and it leads just to really bad comics, because it's people doing comics not because they love them and they want to make good comics. They're doing it for a totally different reason, so that's really annoying. And I think the other thing, which I spoke a lot about in class, is a lot of like superhero comics today. The artists rely so heavily on a photo reference, and they base characters around on actors and things, and they just seem to be trying so hard to make comics look like movies or look like TV shows, when comics themselves can be so wonderful and creative and have their own language that it just seems counterproductive to me. I mean, it's such an individual thing from page to page if you're looking at a comic, but I mean, comics can do things like you can jump between 2 or 3 time periods within one page. You can, in ways that in a movie you couldn't without, because movies are so linear in the way that you go. The other thing you can do with comics is like, Dale talked about, I do a lot of things where I repeat images or symbolism a lot, like later on in a story in a different context. And the great thing about a comic is you can easily flip back to like an earlier page or an earlier sequence instantly, whereas in a movie you can't. You have to like rewind it and find the scene again. But for me, I think I mentioned this before, comics are so much more like editing a movie than shooting or directing a movie, whereas it's more of what you leave out in a comic that's really tells the story. It's like you just try to find the one image or the one moment that communicates what you're trying to say. And I think comics, that's the strength of comics, is sort of that simplicity and that directness, which film for me doesn't seem to have in the same way. And you're just free. Film is always one ratio, like the image is always the same thing, whereas you can turn a comics page and you can have one panel that's like this big with 4 tiny panels that say something in the way that they're laid out, and the next page can be a grid of 9 panels. And it's just, you're so free from page to page to communicate that idea in so many different ways, just in the way that you lay out a page. Whereas with a movie, it's always one standard box, really. So it just seems limitless to your imagination, really, and how you can play with that.
Okay, thanks.
And then I held my breath for 10 seconds.
Hi, Titanic.
Okay, I said idiot to the moron, but it was still good. It was a good
I followed
take.
it. And then I held my breath for 10 seconds.